And on to our next storyteller, Reynelson. Reynelson Martin Jr. is a senior in the College of Business and Economics, pursuing a double major in management and finance. Originally from San Diego, Ray has spent most of his life growing up in Hilo. After graduating in the fall, he wants to work in human resources or as a data analyst. He also wants to pursue his MBA or doctorate in business administration in the near future, working toward his goal of one day returning to UH Hilo to teach at the College of Business and Economics. As one of the Center for Community Engagement's interns and as a student, he feels a great sense of pride, responsibility, and gratitude to promote awareness and trust in the University of Hawaii at Hilo. He knows that as a place that fosters personal, professional, and academic growth, it is important that UH Hilo gives back to the communities that also take pride in UH Hilo as a member of the Hawaii Island community.
All my life, I knew I was different. The kind of different that made me feel so odd. I was not comfortable being in my own skin. Like most kids, I enjoyed playing in the dirt, climbing trees, and building things. But there was always a part of me that had this agonizing feeling of what it meant to be me. It was not until the 4th grade when I started to feel the difference. Some of the other kids in my class started bullying me for being too girly or too weird. I remember always going home and crying into my pillow, wondering why they were so mean to me. This persisted on until I hit middle school. It was there I met Mrs. Wolf, my 7th grade English teacher. I really enjoyed her class. She always pushed her students to be creative and let their imaginations run wild on paper. So for my English project, I decided to keep a journal of my thoughts to share with her at the end of the year. When the time came for us to turn in our project, I handed her my journal. She was surprised that I decided to journal the entire year to jot down my reflections. In my journal, I went over how uncomfortable I was in my own skin and how I felt people wouldn't understand what it is to be me. It was the week before summer break for my 8th grade year. There was this awkward silence between Mrs. Wolf for most of the day. As the bell rang for the end of school, she approached me quietly and asked if I had some time to talk to her and the school counselor. I told her that I needed to let my grandmother know, who was patiently waiting in the car for me. After speaking with my grandmother, I ran back into her class. As I sit in front of her desk, Mrs. Wolf and the school counselor were sitting there quietly. It was then Mrs. Wolf burst into tears and leaned over to give me a hug. Confused and startled by her reaction, I asked her if everything was okay. She explained to me that I am brave for having kept my secret for so long. She told me she could not imagine what it must be like not being able to be myself. She asked me what my family was like, and I explained that my father is retired from the military. Without being pushy, the school counselor reassured me that if I ever wanted to talk to her about anything, that she was all ears. The counselor acknowledged that perhaps one day when I'm ready to talk to him and let him know about my secret. Shook my head with tears in my eyes, knowing that would never be possible. I thought to myself, what could my father understand? He thought people who were different were weird and strange and should not be allowed to be in public, let alone seen. As we sat together in her classroom, Mrs. Wolf and the counselor reminded me that I am strong, smart, and brave, and that no one should tell me how to live my life. I broke down and sobbed, knowing that this feeling will never go away. As we hugged and I dried my tears, I headed down to the parking lot where my grandmother was waiting. My grandmother smiled when I got into the car, but knew something was off. She sang to me and let me sit in silence as we headed home. As I gathered myself for the silent car ride home, I knew that Mrs. Wolf and the counselor was right. No one should tell me how to live my life. It is my life, no one else's. After sitting on my conversation for most of my summer, it was a few weeks before my 8th grade school year when I made the momentous decision that today will be that day. I woke up, ate breakfast at the dining room table, and asked my father and grandmother if they were available after breakfast because I needed to tell them something. After breakfast, they gathered in the living room, their eyes pointed at me, waiting for me to bring up what I wanted to talk about. Took a deep breath and nervously tried to say, "Dad, Grandma, I." then suddenly burst into tears with my hands pressed against my face. Concerned, my grandmother leaned over and gave me a hug and asked if everything was okay. As I gathered strength from her hug, I looked up and it was now or never. I blurted quickly, "Dad, I'm gay. I like boys." My father stood up and started screaming at me. "How is this possible? I never raised you to like boys. You should be liking girls. This is just a phase. You're confused." My grandmother stood up to my father and shouted back, "He's your son. How can you even say that to him, Butch?" which is my father's nickname. Ran into my bedroom, flew myself onto my bed and sobbed. I remember thinking to myself, I knew this would happen. He would never understand. Why did I have to say something? As all these thoughts crept into my head, I got angrier and angrier with myself. Not long afterward, I fell asleep. It must have been a couple of hours later when my grandmother knocked and came into my room. She sat at the edge of my bed and kissed me on my forehead. "Hi, my beautiful grandson," she said with her big smile. "Everything is going to be okay. What you did was brave. I love you." I laid in her lap crying as she stroked my head, reassuring me everything is going to be okay. Despite me now being out, it was still the elephant in the room whenever I was around my father. It felt like I lived a double life. At school, where I lived my out and proud self around my close friends, and at home, keeping my thoughts and desires to myself. All throughout middle and high school, I was constantly bullied by the other kids. They would call me faggot, gay, and all the other words associated with it. Although I played it off when I was bullied that no one could break me, but the moment I would get home, it would break me into a million pieces. Looking back, I was never able to tell my father about being bullied. I felt like he would tell me to suck it up, be a man. However, I should have said something and often think to myself, maybe that would have changed his perspective about me. I would never know. I moved to Maui in 2011 and it was not until 2014 when I finally got the validation from my father that I wanted all those years. My father came over to visit and see how I was doing. I was going through a bad breakup with an ex-boyfriend. I was depressed and lonely, feeling like I had no one. The moment came when we were sitting at my aunt's house in Makawao, watching the sunrise with our coffees. My father is a man of few words, but when he said, "I love you no matter who you choose to love," I broke down sobbing with my head in his lap. He reached over and hugged me, and for the first time in my life, I felt validated and complete. That was the turning point in our relationship with each other. In retrospect, I am a little disappointed that my life did not turn out different between my father and me. However, I am grateful that he accepts me for who I am today. He and I are now like best friends. I can open up to him about anything and he will always be there to listen. He reminds me every day of how strong, handsome, and caring I am. For me, going back to school has also opened up my eyes to meeting others who have similar stories, but with worse outcomes, having been disowned and kicked out of their homes just for being who they are. I feel that despite my troubles with being bullied, I am thankful that I did not have the courage to take an easier way out. Not that I have never thought about it, but I'm glad I've never acted upon it. As someone once said, your past does not define you. I truly believe that. My past does not define me. My past has made me the strong, courageous, kind, and caring person that I am today. My message to those who are afraid to come out to their families, I want them to know that despite feeling defeated and devastated in the moment, just know that your life is worth living. Do not let others define who you are. Stay strong and keep your head up high and let your true self shine. I too have once looked at a distorted image of myself, but I now clearly see who I am. Reynelson Martin Jr. I am someone's loving, kind, smart, and caring grandson, son, nephew, brother, and cousin. I am not defined by my sexual orientation, my gender identity, or my affiliations, but for who I truly am, a human being. I finally let my guard down. In a just world, my hope is that people learn acceptance for people who are different. I want others to know that despite who someone may love, that love is love.